I stood at the front of the church, the heavy scent of lilies clinging to the thick, suffocating air. My hands trembled slightly as I clutched a sealed envelope against my chest, its weight somehow heavier than grief itself. Across the rows of dark suits and somber faces, my brother's voice suddenly rang out, slicing through the silence like a knife. She shouldn't speak. Dad barely tolerated her. There was a ripple of approval, a few solemn nods, a few tightening mouths hiding small smirks. Even my mother, Margaret, sitting stiffly in the front pew, offered no objection. My heart twisted, but I kept my face neutral, standing in the center of their cold judgment like a statue carved from shame. The urge to shrink, to step back and disappear into the shadows was almost overwhelming. But I didn't move. I held the envelope tighter, feeling the coarse edge bite into my palm. It wasn't just paper. It was a promise, a truth only I carried, and now, maybe it was time for them to hear it too. I glanced up at Father Douglas, the priest who had known our family for years. His eyes caught mine, questioning, concerned. Slowly, deliberately, I stepped forward, the sound of my heels against the marble floor echoing in the hollow stillness. The weight of the room shifted. A few people exchanged confused glances. Miles crossed his arms and leaned back, a smug tilt to his chin. He thought I was going to embarrass myself. Again. But they didn't know what I held in my hands, and they certainly didn't expect what was about to happen. Growing up in the Bennett household felt like living in a glass box. Always visible, always judged, but never truly touched. I was the youngest of 3 children, the daughter who didn't quite fit into the mold my parents had carved out for what a Bennett should be. My brother Miles was everything they wanted. Confident, assertive, the perfect extension of my father's ambition. My sister Claire, though quieter, carried the family's expectations like a second skin. And then there was me, Elara, the anomaly. Sensitive where I was supposed to be tough, creative where practicality was demanded, different in ways they never understood and rarely forgave. My father, Charles Bennett, had been a formidable man, a self-made businessman whose word was law both at the dinner table and in the boardroom. He wasn't cruel in obvious ways. He didn't raise his voice or his hand. Instead, his disapproval was delivered through a look, a sigh, a door left closed when I needed it open. It taught me that silence could be louder than any shout. As a child, I had tried to win him over with paintings, stories, awards from school. Each time I'd approach him with trembling hands, holding out some token of my worth. Each time he would barely glance up before returning to his paperwork or television. Miles would joke about it later, mimicking me with exaggerated voices and silly smiles, the family laughing along, never thinking how much it stung. My mother, Margaret, was no softer. Her love was transactional, given only when I performed according to her standards, which was almost never. Over time, I stopped trying. I learned to build my own quiet world, one they neither understood nor cared to enter. Still, a tiny ember of hope burned inside me. I thought maybe, deep down, my father cared. Maybe he just didn't know how to show it. I told myself that when the time was right, he would let me see it. Maybe he would be proud. But standing there at his funeral, surrounded by people who had spent their lives reminding me I didn't belong, it was hard to keep that hope alive. The polished wood of the casket gleamed under the heavy light of the chandeliers, a stark reminder that whatever chances there had been were now buried with him. The church itself felt colder than it should have. I could hear the soft murmur of guests shifting in their seats, the occasional stifled cough, the rustling of programs in restless hands. All these people gathered here to honor a man they revered, and yet none of them truly knew him. Not like I did. I wasn't supposed to speak. Miles had made that clear when he organized the service. We need people who actually meant something to Dad to say a few words, he had said, not bothering to hide the slight in his voice. Claire had agreed with a tight nod, her expression unreadable. My mother had simply looked past me, as though I wasn't even in the room. And yet, 2 weeks before he died, my father had called me to his bedside. He looked frailer than I had ever seen him, his once commanding frame now sunken into the hospital bed. His voice was barely a whisper, but his eyes, those sharp, unreadable eyes, were clear. "Alara," he said, his hand fumbling for mine, "there's something you'll need when the time comes." He pressed the envelope into my hand, sealing it with a look so intense it burned into my memory. "When it feels wrong," he whispered, "that's when you'll know it's right." I hadn't opened it. Not yet. Part of me had been afraid of what it might say. Maybe it would be another reminder that I had never measured up. Maybe it would be an apology far too late to heal the wounds it had caused. But standing there, my brother's words slicing through the air, the weight of judgment pressing down on my shoulders, I realized that this was the moment my father had meant. Everything felt wrong, and that could only mean one thing. It was time to open the envelope. My fingers tightened around it. I wasn't here to beg for their acceptance anymore. I wasn't here to defend myself against their cruelty. I was here because my father had trusted me with something they didn't deserve. They thought they knew who Charles Bennett was. They thought they knew who I was. They were about to find out just how wrong they had been. The hush inside the church thickened after my brother's words hung in the air like smoke. She shouldn't speak. Dad barely tolerated her. It wasn't just the cruelty of the statement. It was the ease with which the family accepted it. Cousins looked away awkwardly. Uncles nodded quietly. Even the neighbors we had known for years didn't so much as blink. It was as if a truth they had always suspected had finally been confirmed. And now they were free to box me into the place they thought I belonged. The disappointment, the afterthought, the mistake. I felt my chest tighten, not just from the humiliation, but from a deeper, older ache. The kind built from years of small slights, glances that lingered too long, jokes told at my expense with nobody stepping in to stop them. Miles, standing just a few feet from the casket, smirked like he had finally won some unspoken war. His posture was relaxed, confident, the favored son carrying forward the family name, making sure that even in death our father's legacy stayed polished and clean. No room for the daughter who had never quite fit. My mother, Margaret, sat with her hands neatly folded over her lap, her lips pressed into a thin line. She neither supported nor defended me. She never had. In her eyes, love was something earned through perfect obedience, not given freely. And I had failed that test long ago. The priest, Father Douglas, cleared his throat awkwardly, glancing at me for direction. He knew the Bennetts. He had baptized us, married us, buried so many before us, but even he seemed unsure whether it was right to allow me a voice here, now. And yet, in my hand, the envelope felt heavier with each second that passed. I remembered the way my father had pressed it into my palm, the way his voice had broken when he said, "When it feels wrong, that's when it's right." This was wrong, undeniably wrong, and I could feel that quiet burning insistence in my chest. I was supposed to sit down, accept my place, let Miles and the others tell their carefully curated stories about our father. Stories where I was conveniently left out or painted as the family's gentle embarrassment. That's what they wanted. Instead, I stood. The movement was small but electric. Heads turned. A few whispers darted through the pews. Miles stiffened, his eyes narrowing. His smirk faded into something closer to irritation. He hadn't expected me to challenge him. He certainly hadn't expected me to fight back without saying a word. I didn't need to explain myself. I didn't owe them that anymore. Instead, I stepped forward slowly but steadily until I reached Father Douglas. I extended the envelope toward him, my hand steady now. It was addressed to him, not to the family, not even to me. Only he had the authority to open it here, in this sacred space, in front of these people who had long ago decided my worth. Father Douglas hesitated, reading the outside of the envelope carefully. To be read aloud by the priest only, from Charles Bennett. For a second, a confused frown crossed his face. Then he looked up at me, searching my eyes. Whatever he saw there convinced him. He lifted the envelope above the microphone stand, tilting it for everyone to see, and said, in a firm, clear voice, "Charles left instructions. I will honor them." There was a murmur of discontent from the crowd. I caught a glimpse of Miles shifting on his feet, visibly uncomfortable. Margaret's hands tightened around her funeral program until the edges crumpled. The priest carefully broke the seal. The rip of paper echoed in the cavernous room. The moment stretched taut, as if the very walls were leaning in to hear what would come next. A chill prickled across my skin. I wasn't sure if it was fear or anticipation. Maybe both. I knew this was a gamble. I didn't know what the letter said. It could be anything. A final cruelty, a last test of loyalty, or perhaps the affirmation I had been waiting my entire life to hear. The uncertainty gnawed at me, but I refused to falter. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the truth, the real legacy my father had left behind, the one no one else had cared to see. Father Douglas adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat once more, and began to read. The church fell into complete, expectant silence, and for the first time all day, I felt something inside me stir. Not fear, not sadness, but a fragile, stubborn hope. Father Douglas unfolded the letter with a carefulness that made every crinkle of paper sound like thunder in the silent church. He held it up to the light for a moment, scanning the first few lines. I watched a flicker of surprise pass over his face, his brows lifting slightly before he composed himself and looked out at the gathered mourners. The envelope trembled slightly in his hand, or maybe it was my own heart pounding so loudly that I imagined it. Either way, I could feel the energy of the room changing, twisting with a tension that hadn't been there just moments before. He cleared his throat and began reading in a clear, solemn voice that echoed against the high ceilings. If you're hearing this, it means I am gone. There are things I left unsaid while I lived, and for that, I ask forgiveness. But there is one truth I will not allow to be buried with me. A ripple moved through the crowd. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Miles's jaw tightened. Margaret's knuckles turned white as she gripped the program in her lap. Father Douglas continued, I spent much of my life being a man the world respected. A businessman, a provider, a patriarch. People praised my discipline, my hard judgments, my drive. But what few knew, even among my family, was that I lived much of my life behind walls I built myself. Walls I didn't always know how to lower, especially for those who needed it most. There was a pause. I could feel the sting of it. A lifetime of silence condensed into those words. My stomach twisted, wondering where this was leading, what old ghosts my father had decided to drag out now, too late for explanations. Of all my children, only one ever saw through those walls. Only one had the courage to be herself, even when it cost her everything in this family. That child is Alara. There it was. A gasp echoed from the pews. Heads swiveled toward me, disbelief etched into faces that had spent years pretending I didn't belong. I stood very still, feeling the burn of 1,000 eyes trying to reassess everything they thought they knew about me. Father Douglas pressed on, his voice steady but thick with emotion. Alara, you were my mirror, the reflection of the best parts of me, the ones I was too afraid to show the world. Your compassion, your stubborn hope, your refusal to become what others demanded, these are not weaknesses. They are strengths. They are my true legacy. Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. I wanted to hear every word. I wanted to remember this moment exactly as it was, raw, painful, and beautiful. Across the aisle, Miles shifted uncomfortably. His wife leaned in and whispered something in his ear, but he didn't respond. His face had gone blank, his earlier arrogance crumbling into something that looked dangerously close to fear. I am proud of my business, my career, and the life I built, Father Douglas continued reading. But none of it would mean anything if I failed to acknowledge the one thing I did right, that the world could not see. Alara, you are that right. You are the proof that I was capable of something better than success. I was capable of love. A stunned, suffocating silence fell over the room. It wasn't just surprise, it was reckoning. For years, they had laughed behind closed doors, rolled their eyes at my choices, whispered about my failures. They had assumed my father's silence was an agreement with their scorn. They had no idea that he had been silently, privately proud. And now, in the one moment they thought they could finally erase me, he had spoken from beyond the grave in a voice stronger than they could ever muster. The priest closed the letter with trembling hands. His eyes, misted with emotion, met mine and held them for a moment. In that silent exchange, I felt the weight of everything I had carried alone for so long start to lift. Slowly, I turned to face the congregation. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. The letter had said everything that needed to be said. In that instant, I wasn't the outcast. I wasn't the disappointment. I wasn't the tolerated burden. I was Charles Bennett's true legacy, and nothing. Not Miles's glare, not Margaret's tight-lipped shame, not the judgmental stares of the extended family could ever take that away from me now. For a few long, staggering seconds after Father Douglas finished reading, the church was so silent that the creak of the old wooden pews under shifting weight sounded deafening. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was as if the entire room had been frozen by the force of my father's words. I could feel it, the crumbling of the false narrative they had all built around me. All the years of whispered criticisms, quiet mockery, judgment masked as concern, all of it crashing down under the simple, undeniable truth of my father's final message. Miles was the first to react. He stiffened, his lips pressing into a thin, furious line. He looked around as if searching for someone, anyone, to back him up, but found only a sea of faces avoiding his gaze. His carefully constructed world, where he was the golden son and I was the family's shame, had been shattered in one public, irreversible moment. My mother, Margaret, sat motionless, her face like a marble statue, but I saw the tremor in her hands as she tried to fold the funeral program tighter and tighter, as if she could somehow crush the truth into nothingness between her fingers. I stood there, my back straight, my heart pounding, not from fear, but from a rush of something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Pride. Not arrogance. Not the kind of cold, brittle pride that Miles wore like armor, but a quiet, powerful pride born from knowing that I had been seen, truly seen, even if it came too late for conversations or reconciliation. The letter was no accident. My father had planned this. He had known how they would treat me once he was gone. He had known they would try to erase me, silence me, belittle my place in his life. And so he had made sure that when they tried to lock the door on me one last time, it would be him, not me, who would break it wide open. Father Douglas gently folded the letter and placed it back into the envelope with the kind of reverence usually reserved for sacred texts. He looked out over the congregation, his voice steady as he said, "Charles Bennett left no doubt about what he wanted remembered today." He turned to me, his expression warm and deeply respectful, and added, "Alara, if you would like to say something, the floor is yours." The offer hung in the air. Miles shifted again, clearly hoping, praying, that I would decline, that I would stay silent, give them some slim chance of salvaging their version of events. I thought about it. For a heartbeat, I considered stepping forward and speaking, laying bare all the years of pain and loneliness they had caused. I could have told them about the nights I cried myself to sleep, about the scholarships I earned without anyone ever attending a ceremony, about the quiet victories I celebrated alone, but I didn't need to. My father's words had already said everything that mattered. I shook my head gently and offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. "No," I said softly. "I think he already said it all." A ripple of emotion, guilt, shame, regret, flickered across the crowd. For once, it wasn't my burden to carry. Without another word, I stepped down from the altar and walked slowly, deliberately back down the aisle. Each step felt lighter, as if I was shedding the weight of decades with every movement. I passed rows of stunned faces, some glancing away in shame, others watching me with wide, unreadable eyes. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their apologies. What I needed, what I had always needed, was the truth. And now, finally, I had it. When I reached the back of the church, I paused by the heavy wooden doors, letting my hand brush against the cool, worn surface. Outside, the world was waiting, messy, unpredictable, but mine to step into on my own terms. I turned back one last time, not to look at the family who had failed me, but to honor the man who, in the end, had given me the one thing I had needed most: a voice. My father hadn't left behind money or fame or even an unblemished reputation. He had left behind me, his true legacy. And that was more than enough. The heavy wooden doors of the church swung closed behind me with a final, echoing thud, sealing off the world I was leaving behind. The cool breeze hit my face, carrying the scent of fresh rain on stone and cut grass, washing away the staleness of the funeral hall. For the first time in what felt like forever, I breathed deeply, a breath that didn't feel borrowed or stifled by expectation. I stood alone on the steps, the sealed envelope still clutched gently in my hands, though the letter had already served its purpose. It wasn't just a message from my father. It was my liberation, an invisible key that unlocked every chain I'd let my family wrap around me over the years. Inside the church, murmurs rose like low thunder. I knew they were trying to make sense of it, trying to rearrange their perceptions without facing the guilt that came with it. They would talk, they would speculate, but none of it mattered anymore. Their approval had always been a mirage, shimmering just out of reach, offering nothing real. As I walked slowly down the front steps, I heard hurried footsteps behind me. "Elara!" a voice called out. I turned to see my cousin Jenna rushing toward me, her heels clattering awkwardly on the stone. She was one of the few who had never openly mocked me, but she had also never defended me. She had simply stayed quiet, a different kind of betrayal. She reached me, breathless, her eyes glassy with emotion. I didn't know," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "About Uncle Charles, about how he felt." I looked at her for a long moment. She meant it, or at least she believed she did. Maybe guilt had cracked open a sliver of honesty in her, but the truth was, I didn't owe her, or anyone else there, forgiveness. "I did," I said simply, offering a small smile that was more for me than for her. Jenna nodded awkwardly, stepping back as if realizing she couldn't follow me into whatever came next. I continued walking, my heels clicking with steady resolve, each step a quiet declaration. I am enough. I always was. Later, at the small reception my brother had hastily arranged at a nearby hall, I made a brief appearance. Not for them, but to show myself that I could face them on my terms. The room buzzed with conversations that stopped when I entered. Some people offered tight smiles. Others avoided my eyes. Miles stood stiffly near the bar, nursing a drink, his face a mask of anger and something else. Fear, maybe. Fear that the truth, once spoken, could never be fully erased. Margaret approached me briefly, her face carefully blank. "Your father surprised a lot of people today," she said, voice clipped, each word dragged out like it hurt her. I met her gaze, feeling strangely calm. "Maybe he didn't change," I said gently. "Maybe he just finally told the truth." She flinched, almost imperceptibly, then turned away without another word. And that was enough closure for me. I didn't stay long. I didn't need to. Outside again, under the wide, open sky, I felt light. Not because everything had been healed. It hadn't. Some wounds don't close neatly. Some scars remain, reminding you of the battles you've fought to become yourself. But for the first time, I wasn't carrying the shame that had never belonged to me. In the days that followed, I returned to my small apartment filled with paintings, books, and half-finished poems. A world I had built when no one else cared to see me. And now, it didn't feel lonely. It felt like home. I framed the letter from my father, not because I needed the words anymore, but because it was proof that love could exist quietly, stubbornly, even when it was imperfect. Sometimes, love isn't loud or obvious. Sometimes it hides behind silence, fear, and pride. But when it's real, it survives, even after death. I learned something powerful standing at my father's funeral, holding his final words like armor against a lifetime of doubt. You don't need the world's permission to be worthy. You don't need their acceptance to have value. The people who truly see you, whether they are beside you in life or speaking to you from beyond it, will never let you forget it. And for the first time in my life, I didn't forget it either. I am Alara Bennett. I am my father's legacy, and I am finally free.